This is your obligatory spoiler warning. If you haven't played the first 3 seasons of Telltale's The Walking Dead game, we suggest you don't watch this video. You've been warned. Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Vince Tomlinson with Darkpad. Today folks, I want to talk about narrative. More specifically, I want to talk about narrative that we as players of video games give a about. It seems in this day and age, a huge portion of video game fans are yearning for compelling storylines in their games. Stories that engross the player and create a connection between you and some moving pixels on a screen. An effective storyline and compelling characterization that can make or break games, and the failure to do so collapses the entire game into all the other stuff. The music's good. This brings me to Telltale's The Walking Dead. Now don't get me wrong guys, this series has its strong points, and there are a lot of them. The compelling character-driven storyline, the intense choices for the player, the gorgeous comic style aesthetic, and the beautiful captivating soundtrack. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. But I've developed a serious problem with the way Telltale goes about its storytelling in The Walking Dead, and it fundamentally comes down to who they choose to kill off and who they choose to keep alive. Okay, mostly kill off. I'm going to start with Season 1. We all know it, we all love it, we all cried like newborn babes over it. Why was that? I mean, from my perspective, it's because of the sheer emotional weight of the story. Telltale made us genuinely care about these characters, and there was an outright need to keep most of them alive and happy. Granted, this was a world swarming with zombies, cannibals, and general awfulness around every corner, but by God, it was worth it to see Clem smile, and shame on you if you didn't give her food when you had the choice. Don't touch me! Anyway, as I was saying. The first season had an outpouring of innate connections to the characters you had grown attached to over the course of the game, the result being a bona fide emotional reaction when characters were killed or left the group. It was effective because this was one of the first times we as the player had seen a narrative quite like this. Sure, we had this kind of thing all the time in the Walking Dead TV show and the graphic novels, and even in other shows like Game of Thrones and video games like Mass Effect or Heavy Rain, but this game felt fundamentally different in how it built these connections. They were constructed through the minute reactions between characters and how they dealt with the horrific world that they were thrown into, and as much as I don't like using this word, it describes the interactions perfectly. They felt human. Now this brings me to my issue with the narrative. You can only use it once. What do I mean by this? Consider how you felt playing the second and third seasons of The Walking Dead game. Can you honestly say that you felt nearly as attached to any of the characters that were introduced? Kenny doesn't count. We all love Kenny. He had it so hard. Why do you think that is? Because Telltale used the same formula. This formula being, player encounters group. Player is accepted into group. Player forms bond with members of the group. Horrible world slowly kills member of group. I can't say this with absolute certainty, but it seems like once Telltale found a formula that worked, they stuck with it and didn't bother to change and improve upon it. The result being a detachment from the story and a negative sense of familiarity. Now I can understand that time constraints can restrict how far you can go with a choice to find story given the amount of work that goes into making these games in such a short space of time, but you could argue that no one would be upset if more time was spent making sure these stories had the same impact on the player as they did in the first season. I can go into even further detail with this, with what I'm going to call the Grim Reaper model. And the Grim Reaper model is this. Once a non-playable character is part of a scenario where they can be potentially killed off or otherwise removed from the narrative, they are immediately marked for death for the rest of the game, and we as players know that their presence, if they survive, will have absolutely no bearing on the ultimate conclusion. Now this is dangerous for the games that are built on the stories they tell. If the player has little to no empathy for the characters they are interacting with, then the narrative and characterization has failed. And you see this over and over and over again over the course of the Walking Dead game. But the most prominent example of this is with our favourite tragedy story, Kenny. Besides Clementine, Kenny was the only consistent character in the Walking Dead game. He faced a lot of difficult situations but kept on trucking through all of them despite what effect they had on him.
Jesus Christ! Stop!
Or his face. But I can forgive the fake death from the first game as it gave a great setup for the revelation of his survival in Season 2, and it created a great cornerstone in Clementine's story. But it's towards the end of the game when the choice was made between letting either Kenny or Jane live where the disconnect happens. We had the entire course of Season 2 to realise that the same narrative model is being followed, and by the time we get to this point, we immediately know that Kenny's character doesn't matter to the story anymore. And this point is proven in Season 3. Kenny dies. And we felt nothing. Maybe a twinge of disappointment, maybe an air of frustration, but nowhere near the reaction that such a character deserved. And this disconnect continues into the third game. You'd think the introduction of a new playable character into this harsh and unforgiving world would be an exciting concept, but nope! Instead I'm sat there as a jaded husk waiting to see how this new character will be killed or who he's going to encounter and how they're going to get killed. Yes, I understand that ultimately death is an overwhelming possibility in this world, but building an effective narrative hinges on things other than whether a character is going to be shot in the face in this episode or the next. In Season 3, I couldn't care less about any of the characters that were introduced because I've had 2 seasons of watching them play past the death sentence. Just look at games like Detroit Become Human. Regardless of what you think of the storyline or the characters, you only need to look at the possibilities created by a single decision to know that the death of a character can seriously affect the outcome of the game, where their presence can influence scenarios that may not have even occurred had they been removed from the narrative earlier in the game. This is what the subsequent seasons of The Walking Dead could have been, making the characters you encounter integral to the storyline so their gruesome demise had a major ripple effect on the narrative, instead of it just being cheap cannon fodder to keep a story moving and just to entertain the possibility that the character may somewhat be affected by it. Spoiler alert, they're not. What's sad is there were elements of great storytelling in the second and third seasons of The Walking Dead. Clementine's imprisonment with Carver's group, Kenny still suffering from the death of his family, and even Harvey's internal struggle between newfound love and the bloodbound loyalty to an estranged family member. But they were quickly overshadowed by the scythe of the gamer's version of the Fourth Horseman. Consider the writers of the first season of The Walking Dead game, Sean Vanneman, Mark Darren, and Gary Whitta. After the release of Season 1 and 400 Days, Whitta left the team. Considering how the storylines panned out in Seasons 2 and 3, it's probably safe to assume that when Whitta left, he took with him whatever elements that made Season 1 so captivating. Am I saying this means that the rest of the writing team did a bad job? Of course not. I still played through the games and thoroughly enjoyed them, but that key element of emotional attachment to the characters that I was introduced to was missing. Consider The Last of Us as an example of characters with a short presence in the game's narrative. Henry and Sam were introduced relatively early in the game, and we as the player grew used to having them around, only for them to be suddenly snatched away in mere seconds. You saw the profound effect this had on Joel and Ellie for the rest of the game, and how 2 briefly used characters influenced the overarching narrative. Now imagine how much more crushing their deaths would have been if choice-driven character development had been thrown into the mix. How about there was an option to make sure Henry didn't commit suicide so he could have become part of Joel and Ellie's group? Imagine how much more differently the game would have panned out. This kind of paradigm is non-existent in The Walking Dead. It doesn't matter how far the storyline can diverge upon the death of a character or some significant choice being made. These events mean nothing if the branches of narrative always curve back towards the same outcome. I'm looking at you, Mass Effect 3, with your colours. Does this mean that I think Telltale's The Walking Dead is a bad set of games? Hell no. Like I said, the gameplay as a point and click is great. The music is moody and depressing to reflect the world that you're in, and the graphics are gorgeous, crisp, and reflect that good old comic book style that we all know and love. I just feel that something in the writing element of the game was lost in the process of making the second and third seasons. It's like making brownies. If you're using a cheap brand of butter when you're using gourmet chocolate and eggs from a golden goose, then the end result is you have to take the tray out of the oven. It isn't going to be great as it could have been. Sorry, I just really love brownies. But the good news is that Gary Whitta is returning to write for the final season of The Walking Dead game in order to complete the story of Clementine that he started. It's my hope that he brings whatever he brought to the table in Season 1 so we can all sit there with broken hearts once more and applaud what I'm sure will turn out to be a great send-off for a great game.
Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'm Vince.
I'm Cam.
And we're Darkpad Media.
Come back soon. We're going to be doing all kinds of things. We're going to be doing games, movies, comics. If there's anything else you're interested, let us know.
So if you enjoyed the video, make sure you click subscribe, which you can find here. We'll try and upload as much as we can. We'll probably get a schedule eventually at some point soon. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for now. Bye for now.
Yes. Bye.